Hi. So, I'm dying. I actually did something purposeful with the art. I kind of, I tried on this. I tried to kind of make it look like he was kind of going passing out a little. You'll understand why the cover art is this later. But, 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 if you haven't watched the little one shot I did, do check that out because it has a few little announcements. I'm gonna re-go over them. If you don't care, skip maybe 10 seconds. I don't know. Um, I was given fan art. Their fan art on my posts. Um, I I actually did get permission for a fic, another fic, not the Peaches one, another fic that I'm excited about. That I'm gonna do as one shot, even though it's 5 parts. And I yeah, my brain is stuttering. Don't forget to use the post if you want to send recommendations. That's yeah, the post. This post is for recommendations. Post. This chapter will have me butchering some names because I have no idea how to say these names. Also, I guess an animal abuse warning. I don't usually give warnings, but I thought may as well give one. That's your warning. That's your warning. If you continue, that is your own thing. My brain is absolutely scattered. Scatterbrain. Scatterbrain. Okay. I did have fun making this cover art, though. I really did have fun. Oh, yeah. I almost forgot the Menda. Should I, should I do something for, I, I've noticed how quickly the subscribers have grown. Should I do something if I get 500? If so, what? Leave some suggestions because I have no idea. Last time I just played Minecraft with Onyx. Oh yeah, another thing. Should I embarrass my friends? You know how like every now and then I randomly at one of my friends in like a comment section or other bullshit, and like I randomly like last video I actually added Silly, which is my friend deal, for interrupting my recording. It's not a big deal. I just thought it was funny. And I've actually called out a few of my friends' channels to give them some attention. Should I just have a video of just me, like, having a giant list of freaking people? Like, just a list of, like 25 plus podfickers. A list of them. It's like, hey, here's all my friends' channels. I'm practically friends with a bunch of them, but it could be fun to do. I don't know. Anyway, I should probably actually get into this chapter. This is chapter 3 of I Borrowed a Cat's Paws by CrouchingTiger28. Remember to check the description and all that shit for all the crapola. Remember, chapter 1 is the one that will have the permission because confusing permission. Anyway, let's get to it. The invisible wall between him and his actions showed up every time he tried to get back into the station, no matter which route he took. Crouched behind a sign at the edge of the street, about the closest he could get before the officer's lingering quirk took over. Shota glared at the door to the police station. He wasn't going to get anywhere like this. Hopefully the officer's quirk would wear off with time. If not, Shota could find the officer in question once he'd been turned back into his proper form. But with Namasa and Sansa out of the equation, it was unlikely anyone else would be willing to help him. Better to go directly to the source, UA. He could probably find the Onomorius residence if he tried. but there was always the chance he'd misremember their address. Even if he made it there wasn't any assurance that the kid would even realize there was something up. Coda would know, though. So that meant he had to get back to the bus stop. There was no way he could make it over the roofs in his current form, especially with how physically exhausting his day had been. He'd have to take the bus to the trade station, then the bus again, then switch routes about halfway through, which meant first and foremost getting back to the bus stop. The streets had been half-heartedly swept, but they wouldn't be properly cleaned until after nightfall. So, Shota still had to be very careful where he stepped. He couldn't see the remaining glass shards nearly as well in this form, but on the bright side, he was a lot closer to the ground. Scanning the ground like he was doing a hero patrol, Shota slowly picked his way back to the bus stop. Even that short walk in such a small form, and being so careful, took him over an hour. Shota turned the corner and saw the bus idling at the stop. As the last person got onto it, he broke into a sprint. But unlike when a person was making tracks to get to the bus in time, the bus driver didn't bother to stop for a running cat. The door closed and the bus pulled away as Shota made it to the awning. The next bus taking the route he wanted would be another hour and 15 minutes. For a long, contemplative moment, Shota considered the merits of giving up now and living the rest of his life as a cat. Unremarkable and without a care in the world. And then he remembered his class of Hellions, his own cats, and most importantly, Hizashi. Also, cats didn't have thumbs. It had been less than a day, and Shota already missed his thumbs. And rarely as he used it, his voice. He wanted to talk to someone. So, Shota retreated under the awning and settled onto one of the bus stop's benches to wait. He knew better now than to let the sunlight and the unfamiliar body ease him into a deeper sleep than he wanted. He kept his unusual shallow cat naps, waking every few minutes, or when a particularly noticeable noise dragged him out of his dozing. It was harder to sleep lightly as a cat. Everything no, seemed noteworthy with such sensitive ears, and the warmth made him want to slow down and really sleep. But he managed. He noticed the bus himself this time, and managed to be out of his seat and on the bus almost before the driver had opened the door all the way. Then he immediately ran into another problem. Shota didn't have a problem with heteromorphic quirks. He knew there was a lot of people who considered those with heteromorphic quirks to be unnatural or subhuman. But Shota worked for a literal biological rat who happened to get a quirk that made him a genius. The only gripe he had with mutations was that his quirk didn't work on them, which made it a lot harder to fight heteromorphic quirked villains. Other than that, though, he didn't particularly care, nor did Shota particularly dislike snakes. He thought they were interesting creatures, and he firmly believed, but would never admit out loud, that he thought their faces were cute. Other than the risk of potential venom, there wasn't any logical reason to avoid snakes. As long as you could identify which ones were toxic, that was a non-issue. Most cats, on the other hand, hated snakes. Shota had once presented Missy with a cucumber just to see happened. What had happened was that Shota had needed to cancel her quirk very quickly before she exploded a cucumber all over the kitchen. Bakawawa had puffed up like a very loud pine tree and bolted as soon as the coast was clear. Shota was so busy dodging feet and a few tails, tentacles, or other such limbs that he didn't realize there was a snake in the bus until he practically tripped over it. Meow! Shota shrieked, springing away before a single conscious thought could pass through his head. Immediately, the bus was in chaos. People were shouting and scrambling away, others shouting and hastening towards the snake. Quirks going off in their shock and confusion. Shota stared around himself in confusion, momentarily disoriented by his unexpected high vantage point. It took him a moment to realize that in his instinctual panic, he had scaled a living person. He was balanced across their shoulders, claws dug through the fabric of their vests, their dress shirt, and likely into their skin as well. Hey, Nissan! The young man standing beside Shota, or rather beside the man Shota was standing on, started clearly stifling his laughter. You've got something you've got something on your shirt. Thank you, Nikun kun, the man said easily. I hadn't noticed. I'm so sorry. Their exchange was interrupted from the middle of the bus. One of the two women who hadn't run from the snake was bowing at nearly 90 degrees, long green hair falling into her face. My quirk is similar to the snake hero, Uabasi, and I had not noticed one of my snakes was missing from my headdress. There was a snake wrapped around her arm. Even just looking at it made Shota dig his claws deeper into the man's shoulder, his fur puffing up completely against his will. I didn't mean to disturb anyone, the woman said, and then repeated, I'm so sorry. The man that Shota was standing on jerked his head towards the woman and the kid. Ni Sikido hurried towards her. That's perfectly fine, madam, Nixiko said gently, holding out his hand. We don't begrudge you the mistake. Everyone's lost control of their quirk a time or two. The whole bus started to murmur in agreement. The woman hesitantly lifted her head. Shota caught sight of tears still glimmering in her eyes. Well, now he felt like a terrible person, especially since he physically couldn't relax with the snake still in sight. It was a miracle his quirk hadn't activated automatically and tipped off everyone in the bus that he was, at the very least, a quirked animal. Slowly, people started filtering back to their seats. The snake woman had a wide had as wide a circle around her as a crowded bus could get. But that was pretty small. Fortunately, the snake vanished up her sleeve, and Shota could finally relax his tense, hackle-raising muscles. Do you want some help with that, Nisa? Nisiko offered cheekily. If you wouldn't mind, the man agreed. Shota forced himself to retract his claws, wincing as one paw caught on the fabric of the man's expensive-looking vest. He tried to jump down to the floor of the bus, but he couldn't find a clear spot before Nisiko picked him up off the man's shoulder. Where did the kitty come from anyway? Nisiko wondered, cradling Shota like a baby. It's so cute! Don't you think, Kamani-san? Ni? It is quite a handsome specimen, Kamen agreed. All black. That's good luck, you know. You're just upset it's not a tuxedo. Niseko pouted at him. You hate every cat that's not a tuxedo. Is that it? I don't hate cats that aren't tuxedos. Kamen sighed. No matter how many times you ask, I still will not hate cats that aren't tuxedo. You hated Toto. Toto was a loathsome creature, regardless of his color. Common said firmly. Well, can we keep this one then? Nisiko shifted his grip, and before Shota had a chance to do anything but yelp in protest, he was being dangled by his armpits in front of the unimpressed Kamen. It didn't necessarily hurt, but it was certainly uncomfortable. Shota squirmed, barely even catching Kamen's response. Your dad brings home enough cats for the whole house, Nisiko. Before he could wriggle right out of Nikoso's grasp, and fell unceremoniously to the floor. Immediately, Shota was moving, away from Nikio and Kamen, past the green-haired snake lady and her scaly friend, and all the way to the back of the bus. There were no snakes at the back of the bus. Fortunately, nor was there anyone who wanted to take him home with them. Shota slipped under the seat and closely watched the sign displaying the next stop. It was only a 20-minute ride the rest of the way, and then Shota hurriedly got off the bus. Nobody stopped him. Nikisa made kissy noises, but Kamen pulled him away before he could try to go after Shota. Shota had to run from the bus stop to the train station to make it in time. The arrival and departure times not correlated for a creature as small as him. He made it through the turnstile just in time, sprinting to board the train before it pulled away. Kitty! Shota vowed to never again in his life pester a cat that wanted to be left alone. At least Daxio had clean hands. This child, most likely a boy, but Shota hadn't gotten a good look, and all children's voices sounded the same, had something staining his pudgy 5-year-old hands. Shota snarled and bit him hard, glad the cat's sense of smell didn't translate to better sense of taste. Whatever was on his fingers smelled like chemicals and rot. It Shota didn't care to taste it. Leave it. A middle-aged woman who was hopefully the kid's mom snapped, grabbing his wrist and reached for Shota again. Of course, the boy immediately started crying, and Shota pinned his ears to his skull and moved to the other side of the train, retreating under an unoccupied seat. It had been a long day. Shota had been suppressing the urge to groom himself all day, but now the rotting chemical scent was clinging to his fur, and all he wanted was for it to be gone. He let his cat instincts take over, and the scraping of his rough tongue over his fur was surprisingly soothing. He was fine. Everything would be fine. Finally, he didn't smell like rot anymore, and Shota settled heavily on his side, peering out from underneath the seats. He didn't dare try to take a nap, not with the sticky-fingered kid still somewhere in the same car as him. There was a teenager sitting across from him with shifting geometric patterns on her skin, and Shota watched idly as they split and joined again, constantly moving and never repeating. He wondered what her quirk was. The steady shifting was almost mesmerizing. and Shota had to look away before it lulled him to sleep. The cat vision kept surprising him with how bad it was. The far side of the train was a vaguely grayish blob, only sudden motion standing out to Shota. After what felt like years, the speakers finally announced Shota's stop next. It felt like he was wearing training weights again, as Shota dragged himself upright, staggering off the train. He slipped out the gate by following a businesswoman, though, and then stopped at the base of the stairs up and out of the subway tunnels. It was raining. In fact, it was pouring. Water running in rivulets down the stairs, despite the deep storm drains on either side. Shota's heart sank, but he forced himself up the stairs. Instantly, he was soaked to the bone. His fur clung to him like a second skin, and it made him feel like he gained 20 kilograms. Seeing in the middle of a rainstorm was also exponentially more difficult as a cat. The constant motion of the rain blinded everything into a muddy blur. Joe could see about a meter in front of him, and only dimly. He soldered on, though, forging towards his next bus stop. He walked right past his first turn, going 3 blocks in the wrong direction before he realized. Then he had to double back and carefully inspect each sign, squinting through the pouring rain. He managed to just barely catch his second turn in time, only realizing it even was his turn because of a particularly notable flashing neon sign for the ramen shop on the corner. Shota almost got hit by a car less than a minute later, and he retreated to the meager shelter of a restaurant awning, with his soaked fur puffed up and spiky from terror. It took several minutes for his heart rate to slow down, and several more for him to dare venturing out into the street again. He stuck to the sidewalks as much as physically possible this time. He almost got stepped on twice, and a bicycle zipped by less than half a meter from him, spraying him in a wide arc of muddy water. Every step felt like it was dragging through thick mud, or he was trying to shove off the Nomu and the USJ again. The tip of his tail was numb and tingly, which Shota was pretty sure was bad. But he was just glad it was warm summer rainstorm instead of a freezing typhoon. Shota took a moment to duck under a covered patio for a moment, shaking the worst of the water out of his fur. He flicked each paw individually, lashing his tail and spraying droplets all around him. He almost jumped out of his skin when something hit the ground less than a meter from him, shattering in a spray of glass and alcohol. A shrill voice gofed with laughter. And Shota turned to see a group of older teenagers sitting around one of the tables closest to the door. Their table was stacked with convenience store food, onigiri and cup ramen and yakitori skewers. There were also several bottles of sake. Shota didn't recognize the labels, but he suspected they were the cheaper variety, the sort of thing you might be able to buy without a valid ID. Manrique, give me your bottle, the girl with a shrill, obnoxious voice said. I want to see if I can hit it. No! The guy, who looked like he had more muscle than his skin could hold, cradled one of the bottles closer to him. I'm not done with it. Aw, leave the cat alone. The skinny girl, who looked like she was literally made of plastic, rolled her eyes more than was actually physically possible without a quirk allowing it. Oh, come on, Nidro. Ni- the shrill one sighed. It's funny. I don't care, Himi, Nidro grumbled, burying her nose further in her phone. Just leave it. You can use mine. The last guy who had spiky hair that was so bright that Shota could tell it was orange, even through his cat eyes, slid his bottle towards Himi. Thank you, Otto. Himi snapped. She heft the bottle, and Shota braced himself to head back into the rain. And then Himi paused. Actually, why don't you do it? She slid the bottle back to Atto, grinning at him sharply. He blinked, glancing around cautiously, and then whispered, not nearly quiet enough. You know unlicensed quirk use is illegal, Himi. Shota's ears pricked against his will. He did not need another problem like this. The Glass siblings were bad enough, and Rebound had been around for that. There was no way Shota could take on 4 unknowns at the same time while he was a cat. Everything's legal if there's no cops around, Manriki grumbled, chewing on his stripped clean yakuri stick. Exactly. Himi patted Atto on the back. It'll be fine. Atto shrugged and he hefted the bottle, and Shota braced himself to bolt again. He really didn't want to go back into the rain, but it beat getting hit by flying glass. Because just what he needed today was another alteration with more broken glass. Atto hurled the bottle at him, and Chota leapt away, bolting back into the downpour. It was just as terrible as he expected, instantly soaking him through again. Despite the heaviness of his step, Chota forced himself to run the length of the block before slowing down to a walk again. He'd barely taken 2 steps when a hand closed around his tail. The hand yanked hard, and Shota yowled in pain as his whole spine jolted, nerves tingling. Not so fast, kitty, Himini sing-songed. Shota wanted to put his claws through her eyes. He's not as fast as I hoped, Manriki said sadly, and the hand on his tail shifted, moving up his spine. Shota tried to bolt, but he found he couldn't move away from the touch. The hand clutched tightly around his neck and dragged him up, and all Shota could do was dangle limply in the grip. I'll put him down, Manriki, Atta said. I want to chase him down again. Shota was unceremoniously dropped on his feet, and he was instantly running again, sprinting blindly through the rain. Now that he was paying attention, he could hear the strange patch of silence behind him. The hum of raindrops completely replaced by the pounding of footsteps. Each step Shota took felt like an immeasurable effort, and despite the natural speed and grace of a feline form, the day was taking its toll on him. His last hope was get up high, somewhere a human couldn't follow. Nope! Mariki's hand closed on his scruff again, mid-air. And Shota let out a strangled chirp. He almost made it that time, Himi giggled. Should we see how far he could get if we let him go? Can we stop running places? Nergio grumbled. Shota tried to force an agreement out past Mikura's grip around his throat. He'd like to stop running too. At least one of the people in this group had some kind of water control quirk, so he wasn't getting rained on right at this very instant. It was a cold comfort. Shota was supposed to be a racerhead. He was a pro hero, the scourge of the underground, terror of villains and hero students alike. He was not supposed to be a house cat chased down and tormented by a group of teenage delinquents. The cold world was hazy smudge of gray now. Shota's vision swimming as he ran out of oxygen. By the time Manriki dropped him again, Shota was almost too exhausted to even land on his feet. He hit the ground in a wet splat, standing there and shivering for a long moment. It's not even doing anything, Himi huffed, her voice grating on Shota's oversensitive ears. Give it a minute, Atto scolded, and something cold and hard jibbed painfully into Shota's ribs. The world swam around him when he tried to see what it was. Everything swirling and blending together. Had he been drugged? This didn't feel like just asphyxiation. It felt like something external was messing with his senses. It couldn't have been Manriki. Not that fast. And nothing else had touched him except the kid on the subway. 5 years old, but not in school during hours, despite wearing the uniform, traveling with his hypersensitive mother. Sticky hands that smelled like chemicals. The chemicals getting in Shota's fur. Shota had been drugged, yes, but most likely completely by accident, by a kid with a newly developed quirk. Come on, do something. Otto sounded impatient now, and a blunt object came back, this time shoving him back so hard it almost flung Shota off his feet. It was Otto's boot, he realized. Otto was kicking him. Shota wobbled on his feet, trying to take a step forward. His human muscle memory clashed with feline instincts, and he went sprawling onto his nose in the mud. His fur immediately plastered to his skin again. With his claws bared and digging into the mud, should have dragged himself forward. Wild laughter echoed behind him, grating on his nerves and making his chest burn with humiliation. It's not a cat, it's a worm! Himi shrieked with laughter. Had Shota been a human, he would have punched her several times, just for doing this to any cat. Shota would have found a way to charge them with something. A legal quirk use at the very least. Shota's limbs felt like lead, and he finally slumped completely into the rippling mud puddle he was lying in. He barely kept his nose above water, hardly able to breathe, with the world stripping, dipping and spinning around him. Come on, get up! Otto nudged Shota aside with his toe again, and Shota braced himself to be kicked. He knew it was coming. He could barely even see, let alone stand up. And he was certain at least one of these people in this miserable group was the sort that would impart one last kit to the cat they'd been tormenting. I wouldn't do such a thing if I were you. Should have felt like he should recognize that voice. But with the rainfall and the drug in his system and Trimmy's shrill cackling, it all blurred together in his mind. All Shota could think was that he had to stay awake, at least until they left him alone, and he could drag himself to some meager shelter to sleep off the drug and wait out the rain. Who are you? A shrill, obnoxious voice demanded. Irrelevant. The rain came back, pelting Shota with heavy raindrops. He groaned low in his chest. The teens had probably left if the rain was back. Shota had just made it to shelter. That was all. You're a very determined kitty, aren't you? Cold hands wrapped around Shota's sides, lifting him up out of the puddle and into the air again. Everything tipped and spun around him, and Shota tried to breathe while he still could. Don't worry, the newcomer said. I'll get you somewhere warm and safe. The world flipped inside out. One instant, Shota One instant, Shota was in a grimy alley in the middle of summer rainstorm, and the next he was somewhere warm and golden, dripping water onto a smooth hardwood floor. What took you so long? A whiny voice demanded. I was slightly delayed, said the voice holding Shota. Is that another cat? There was a sound of chair legs scraping on wood and heavy footsteps. Then a finger poked Shota between the eyes. Why did you bring home another cat? Shota forced his eyes open, trying to focus his gaze on the person standing over him. Their words and tone reminded him of Hazashi, but their voice made his skin crawl with anxiety. He still couldn't place exactly who they were, who anyone was, but he needed to see. He finally managed to get his eyes to focus, and he was met with shaggy hair, pale skin, and narrowed eyes with shrunken irises. What he really recognized was the hand, still stretched out from where it had poked him. And finally, the voices clicked in his head. The deep, eloquent voice holding him, the raspy, whining voice of the man in front of him, and even the drawl from someone Shota couldn't see. His vision of vague haze beyond the hand looming in front of him. There was no way Shota was getting out of this. Not as a cat, and probably not even if he'd been in his true form with all his gear and backup already on the way. Blessedly, before Shota could do more than gasp in surprise, he finally, mercifully, passed out. Sorry, I'm giggling because mid-recording, fucking loud-ass storm started. I have no idea if you guys can hear it in the recording. If you can, I'm so sorry, but the weather's bipolar. Okay? And the notes are pretty funny. Remember, I give you Katsawa, you give me comments. Pretty please. That's just the same for me, honestly. Why can I get permission for every cat series? I don't fucking know. This is the second cat series I've gotten permission for, you know? Oh shit, my brush is over here. That was supposed to be put away. Anyways, um, I'm probably gonna mess around with the next artwork. I don't know if I'm gonna podfic the next chapter or not. Probably not, but I may reread it because I can, and I want to start in the cover art at least. But yeah, remember to check the description for all the things with this fic, because I have to copy and paste it because there's a lot of shit for this fic, including the author's Discord and all that. Also, if an author has a Discord or something, do you guys want me to link their Discords? I did it for this one because I'm in the Discord, and the author's amazing. Since they did, they saw me asking, and they were like, "Yeah." I was debating doing it for others, but I don't think many of them have Discords. But most of the time I can find them pretty easily because they're usually in their profiles or something else. I don't know. Something to think about. Remember the stuff at the beginning. Do try to leave some comments about that because I am very curious about that. And I do have a blooper. I do have a blooper today. There is a blooper at the end here. But I realized this is actually a hobby. This is kind of my first hobby. That sounds really weird to say, but I've never had anything I would call a hobby. So it's kind of different to actually have a hobby. I do enjoy it though, so yeah, it's something to think about. Anyway, bye. Firmly believed they would firmly believed, but never would. Okay, we're just gonna